Welcome back to Higher Exchanges. I'm your host, Jesse Redmond, Head of Investor Relations and Business Development at Leaf Brands. I'm joined once again by Morgan Paxia. He is the co-founder of Poseidon. Morgan, what's going on, man?
Oh, doing great. Got the Bills game tonight. We're going to squish the fish. Just got back from racing in Marina Del Rey where Emily and I got some hardware.
Oh, nice.
So that was a lot of fun. It's fun to be competitive in a different format than cannabis. So it was good.
Yeah, I was chatting with Emily the other day. It sounds like, speaking of the fish, she's been spending a lot of time down in Florida, it sounds like.
Sunburn. Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. So you've got, is that home or away tonight?
Home.
Big time.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, Morgan, we're not alone today. We're joined today by a first-time guest and probably a fresh voice for most people out there. His name is Tucker Johnson. Tucker, what's happening, man?
Man, not much. I'm just excited to be here, go over these topics, and I just appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, I think we met through the podcast. Didn't we, Tucker? Didn't you listen to the show and then you sent me a DM? It was like a year or two ago, and that's how we started talking?
Yeah, absolutely. My dad, who's obsessed with Twitter, which is another conversation, he had actually sent me a link of yours and listened to a couple of the podcast episodes and sent you a DM, and I'm glad you got back to me. It was like next day, and we hopped on a call, and that was probably about a year ago.
Yeah, we've talked a few times since. I connected well with Tucker because Tucker is a guy who has a good background in finance, understands economics, but he's also somebody that understands weed and really likes the plant and is really passionate about it. So I tend to connect well with people that love that intersection of cannabis and finance. I have friends that are strictly finance, a bunch of just weed friends, but I really connect well. I put Morgan in that category too. People that love the plant but also love finance as well. And so yeah, I've had a bunch of good conversations with Tucker in a non-public format. And Morgan and I have been interested in talking about hemp, intoxicating hemp, and what's going on there for a while. And I thought Tucker would be a good guest to kind of supplement our knowledge. I was saying when we were backstage that, some shows, when we get into them, I feel like I'm an expert is a strong term, but I feel like I'm at least fairly knowledgeable on certain subjects. And then there's other ones like this hemp space where I feel like we're all kind of stumbling through it and learning together. And so I would just kind of put the caveat here, don't take me as an expert. If Morgan's an expert or Tucker's an expert, that's fantastic. But I think the goal of today's conversation is just to get the three of us together, talk through what's going on with the Farm Bill, talk through a couple of states. I think Texas and Florida are important ones here, and then try to connect some of the dots about where all of this might be going. So excited to talk, Tucker. For people that don't know you, can you give them just a bit of your background? You've had a kind of a cool career so far in cannabis.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background was in Big Four accounting and was ready to get out of that and wanted to chase a dream in cannabis. So moved to California in 2017. After making a couple connections, found myself as the CFO of Lil Wayne's cannabis company called Jakua. That was a true startup, and that was really a seed to sale operation. We were using licensing deals and white label deals to be able to drive products straight to the stores without us having to touch a license ourselves. So that really gave me the ability to see from the manufacturing side, the distribution side, and the retail side, and pop in and out day to day to be able to execute each of those items. After that, found myself as the CFO of the Emerald Cup, which I'm sure a lot of the listeners know about that, but it's considered by many to be the mecca of cannabis. And that was really my dream job. And it was an amazing time. Started with the product company, which was called Emerald Cup Supply Company. Worked with the best lab guy in the industry, Harry Rose. Learned a ton from him while overseeing cultivation, as well as manufacturing and all the finances that go along with that. Then that led into me being with the event side, which is what most people know. The Harvest Ball, and then the actual competition, and was there for 3 years. Like I said before, it was an amazing time. I could tell stories for at least 3 or 4 hours about that time. So to keep it short, that really included everything under the sun, the typical CFO roles. But the reason I love that job so much is that it wasn't a job. Every day I was getting to talk to big brands, big players, be plant facing, forward facing with that. And as you said, Jesse, that's what I really love. And that's what really drives me. And a lot of people like to say they're passionate about the plan, and a lot of people are, but for me, that's really what drives my curiosity and my drive in the industry. So after leaving the Emerald Cup, I went into consulting for a little while and consulted for some big brands, a couple large testing companies nationwide, and really just kind of dipped my toes in a lot of different aspects, branched out into some go-to-market material for brands because I understand the culture and really being able to tailor that messaging towards their clients. And then got a phone call from British American Tobacco to go be their head of finance, cannabis lead of their cannabis practice. And I mean, that was an amazing experience, getting to work in multiple countries, some of the largest investments internationally in cannabis, and just a level of exposure that I didn't really know existed until I stepped into that role. And so that was a great opportunity. Really appreciated my time there and everybody I got to work with. And after that, found myself back in consulting. And this is where it kind of goes into the hemp side for me. I was an interim CFO for one of the largest hemp companies in the country. And then that led into me consulting for another large hemp co-packer and manufacturer. So we were doing everything from making white label brands for other stores, making white label brands for legal cannabis brands in legal states, importing THCA, packaging that up. So it was really, the full gamut of all that. And I've been in the Bay Area, the Emerald Triangle in California for a number of years. Now back in my hometown in Nashville, Tennessee, and being back in the Southeast has given me a completely bird's eye view and a forward facing view on what's going on with hemp, what's going on with THCA. And it's frankly been blowing my mind. If I was in California, I wouldn't have been able to see it at this level. And so I'm really excited to talk about this today and really, hopefully educate people on what the facts are, what's true, what's not, and then hopefully be able to give some insight into what might happen in the near future.
So if I'm a listener right now, Tucker, and I hear, oh my gosh, this guy was at BAT, British American Tobacco. Sometimes we hear about cannabis being part of that. Is it the Beyond Nicotine? Is that a bigger operation maybe over there?
Yes.
Is there anything publicly you can, because if I'm a listener, I'm saying, oh my gosh, what is BAT doing? Is there anything publicly that you can disclose in terms of like what you did there and just kind of big picture, what they're doing?
Totally. I don't want to divulge too much just because of that close relationship, but at a high level, obviously, BAT is one of the largest companies in the world. They have a department called Beyond Nicotine, which encompasses drinks and just a whole gamut of wellness products. And among that division is a cannabis practice. And ultimately, BAT, through other subsidiaries and companies that they work with, over the years have made investments, not necessarily directly into cannabis businesses, but directly into the industry as a whole around infrastructure and things of that nature. And through those relationships, they had a team over at their headquarters in London, but they needed somebody that was stateside in the US and really understood the legal implications of monetary transactions, really understood the implications of financial investments into the country and outside of the country, and really just understood the landscape of some of these companies that they invested in. And, like we talked, Jesse, I don't want to mention too many direct names, but some of the biggest CBD players in the US, I was working with them, working with several companies overseas, and then working with a large scale, actually it's the largest cultivator and manufacturer in Canada. And so do you want me to go more in depth than that, or what do you think?
Are they making it, and if it's not cool to say, just say it. I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable spot, but are they making investments into things like MSOs and plant touching US operators?
They're not making investments into MSOs and US plant touching operators. They're more making investments into US based groups that are touching things that center around the Farm Bill versus strictly cannabis. And then investments in other countries that they made are more plant touching, but it's much more focused on the science and the longevity of the plant, centering around patents, genetics, things of that nature. That I could speak on that for a long time, but as you and I have discussed, that's really the far future of the industry once it goes federally legal. And so they're really focused on those high level operations and opportunities, but that obviously starts now. So it's very hands-on, very informative, and a lot of stuff that, like I said, I knew was out there and had been a part of it, but didn't realize the scope until I was involved with them. So a lot of my role it was almost like consulting for these companies. Yes, I was managing the budget for that department I was the main point of contact for these investments in the portfolio. But it was just helping them. How do they do better? How do we better their financial statements? How do we drive growth? And each of those items, as you know, encompasses everything from seed to sale or whatever that specific investment is working on. So,
yeah, sounds like they're definitely playing the long game, pretty much the opposite of everyone on Twitter.
100%. It's definitely the long game.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, why don't I hand the microphone over to you, Morgan, and let's dig in, kind of starting at the high level in the Farm Bill.
Right. Well, yeah, very interesting background on BAT, by the way. And we've had some interesting conversations with them over the years. And it's nice when you do have basically permanent capital, to your point of having that kind of time that bridges across the unknowns of when regulatory change happens. So kudos for them for getting in the game. But, just kind of thinking back or just level setting from how we got to this point where, if you would have asked me 5 years ago who the biggest competition to legal cannabis would be, it would be the illicit market. But then all of a sudden this Farm Bill happens, and then it feels like overnight, now we have this major third area that's grown tremendously, being, the Farm Bill. And so, from your perspective, what did the Farm Bill do? What does it say that has opened this door to basically, the way I think of it is like federally adult use cannabis?
Yeah.
I know we call it intoxicating hemp. Maybe that's not the right way to name it. How do you refer to it? And, so two questions there.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. First off, how I refer to it as a bunch of different names. Sometimes it's intoxicating hemp. Sometimes it seems like a scam from the illicit market. So I refer to it as a number of different things depending on kind of the sector that the conversation is stemming from. But as far as the way that I view what it is it's pretty straightforward. They passed it in 2018 and they said that products that have more than 0.3% THC cannot be sold. And in today's climate, a lot of people want to, try to misconstrue that, try to tweak it and all these different things. But at the end of the day, 0.3% is what should be the baseline. And it's pretty cut and dry. But due to the illicit market, as you mentioned, what's really happened is that because this is not federally legal, it allows the states to have a certain amount of autonomy in how they're going to legislate this. And the problem with that is that these states don't really know what's going on. Cannabis right now is very unknown. A lot of people in the industry don't really know what's going on with hemp or kind of the legal ramifications. So you can imagine bringing that up to the legislators of the state, they're 10 times more confused. And so when these states started allowing smoke shops to sell, hemp-derived THC, all these items, those fall outside of the scope of the federal laws because the states on the ground level don't have any laws prohibiting it. So that in and of itself is a loophole. But then what it also did is it created for THCA and products coming from California to start being shipped legally, sold at smoke shops, sold in these different locations. And consumers think, okay, not all consumers, but a lot in these states think this is tested product. This is at the store. This has been tested for pesticides, potency, all those things. But because of the federal lack of enforcement, the state's lack of knowledge and enforcement, it's just opened the door completely for people to ship just actual THC under the guise of THCA. And so for me, that right there is the biggest loophole that this has created. And I could break it down further, but if you look at that at a high view, you have the black market here, you have the white market here, and you have this tiny gray area in the middle. Well, once this loophole was created, the gray market expanded exponentially, and the gray market is the same as the black. If it's not white, it's gray or black. So ultimately, that gray merged with the black became huge, and people aren't out there doing something that is egregiously illegal by any means because they're following the letter of the law in their state, and that's why the loophole works.
So, right. And well, when you mentioned THCA, but then you have finished products that quote Delta 9 from hemp. So how does that in the way the Farm Bill is written, how are they capturing that and being able to sell, like to your point, in smoke shops and gas stations and such?
For me, that's the biggest question mark. And it's not a question mark because we know what's going on. but they're just doing it. That's really the only way to say it. They're doing it. It's happening. Nobody's stopping it. And, hemp-derived THC, yes, it's THC. You have to use a lot more biomass of the hemp plant to get that same milligram product, but the source biomass is still hemp, right? So that's really how people kind of justify it and skirt around, because the hemp plant itself is less than 0.3% THC. And so the baseline source that's creating the product, that's kosher to ship across state lines. Then once it goes into certain states, it's up to the state to enforce it, and nobody's really enforcing this. And so that's kind of how I think about and describe the hemp-derived THC. And that's why we're seeing drinks, edibles, even these big brands that I know we'll get into later, like Kiva and Can, using this, because they have obviously huge legal teams and they've vetted this out. And, based on federal laws and then the states they're selling in that they target specifically, they know that their products are outside that. And the Farm Bill does not do a good job of further defining what that is. And then the last thing I'd add there is, at a very high level, and I've said this to Jesse a number of times, but I just feel it's important to state this, that, cannabis has been around naturally occurring in nature for millennia. And there's only two plants that exist. Number one is the hemp plant, and number two is cannabis. In the past 2 to 3 years, there has now suddenly become this new plant that has, I guess, suddenly spawned, called THCA. So I'm just making that a point for all the listeners now, that THCA is a part of testing cannabis. THCA is part of the decarboxylation process that happens when you burn or activate cannabis. But THCA is not a new plant. THCA is a cannabinoid that consists to create the total THC content, but by no way, shape, or form, and I don't want to have anybody misconstrued on this, it is not a new plant, and that is the loophole, because if it's not a new plant, then you're either shipping hemp flower or you're shipping cannabis, and the cannabis obviously is not federally legal and can't ship interstate.
Yeah. So maybe a little like kind of historical, because the idea of 0.3% is just purely a legal construct. Like hemp, before we said less hemp is hemp if it's less than 0.3%. Like go back to like World War II, when we had tons of fields of hemp for, supporting the war efforts. Do we know what the THC is when it was just hemp grown in fields?
I personally don't, and that's an amazing point, and that's kind of why I stepped back on the historical perspective. I mean, like you said, for the war efforts, rope, clothes, all those things, and that's why for me, I use the word scam. That might not be the right word, but when you look at it through that lens, 0.3% just really feels like a group of people were sitting in a room and decided this sounds good, and threw a dart at the wall and landed on that. It doesn't really feel like there's a whole lot of precedent behind that or any type of actual research to verify that, because why not 0.05? Why not 1%? I'm a cannabis consumer, and I really love cannabis, and if I consume something that's 1%, I'm definitely not going to feel it. So where's that border? It's unique to each person. How did they create that, that construct?
Right. Well, and I'm assuming it has to tie to like a genetic seed bank, and, probably what we were growing back then had much more characteristics of what we think of as industrial hemp, which is, the tall fibrous plant. It's not a bushy, flowery plant. And so those genetics were very different than, to your point, of what this kind of in-between zone produces, where it doesn't have industrial value. It's really only for purposes for flower. And so, kind of going to first principles, the loophole, or not the loophole, the law, the Farm Bill, if you just say like, because they create this construct and said 0.3%, that's what's opened this whole, call it Pandora's box at the moment, because this unregulated kind of situation that we're dealing with from a federal level, and the states are trying to catch up.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think Pandora's box is the absolute best term to describe this, because now it's open, you're definitely not putting it back in. And that's obviously what we'll talk about here in a few minutes with some of these states. But I also think that this ties to big companies. It's like there's industrial hemp manufacturing happening for all types of other modalities of the product. We're not hearing about those because people in those industries, they're not worried about the THC percentage, right? It's only related to who's consuming it, which not only doesn't really align, but if you also view it through that lens, to have a legal system set up, you have to have some type of enforcement to back that up. And in the Farm Bill, there is actually no outline for the legal enforcement. And even if there was, it's based on states because it's not federally legal. So how does that really flush out when they're sitting at the table trying to make that decision? And I feel like it was kind of we're going to slap this out there. We're going to try to mitigate some of this stuff. We'll deal with it in a few years. And now the country's seeing the illicit market of cannabis. Boom.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in and make the point. Maybe you made it earlier, Hunter, but I always think I get Tuckers and Hunters confused.
Hey, you call me whatever.
Tucker. That the Farm Bill regulates specifically Delta 9 THC, right? And so THCA falls outside of that, but there's also that whole group of synthetics too, which I think is an important conversation to be having, because I think that's some of the THCA flower isn't explicitly garbage, right? Like there could be clean, good flower that qualifies as THCA flower. It's an abused part of the system, so a lot of it turns out to be garbage. But the other side of it, a lot of which is garbage, it doesn't have to be. Like I've consumed D8 products that were clean. It's not my favorite high, but I remember a dispensary in town had some Delta 8 concentrates. I'm like, I want to find out just exactly what Delta 8 feels like. So I bought a jar. It was dabs, and I took a few dabs of Delta 8. And I was like, wow, this stuff gets you high. It's a little bit more chill. It wasn't my favorite thing. I didn't buy it twice, but it wasn't garbage. But I think, Tucker, what happens is that the bad actors turn a lot of these products that could be helpful, because for even D8, is a useful thing. Sometimes it's better for people with anxiety. It doesn't give as much euphoria, so it can be a helpful high for those sorts of people. But the open loophole allows garbage products to be stuffed in what could be valid categories.
100%. And I think as well, like, I'm glad you mentioned the THCA and the hemp and the D9. To me, this is where the lines are the most blurred, is that when I'm consulting for these hemp companies, we're shipping in massive amounts of THCA using large scale, what's the term for like UPS and FedEx, whatever, shipping carriers, logistics. Yeah. It's all described by them as hemp. So it's THCA to the market, but it's hemp to them. So we had a hemp account with one of the big providers. When it's delivered, there's literally a piece of paper that just says, exclamation mark, warning, this is hemp flower. And so to me, that's also another example of when your boots on the ground and you're seeing this, it is much more convoluted and much more complicated than it seems from just reading about it and looking at it, because people are abusing this whole situation. And I frankly can't blame them. They're making money. They're doing what they want to do. They're trying to spread, the knowledge of cannabis, which I'm all for. But I think that's the other issue, is that nobody really can categorize D9 as hemp or THC or THCA or D8, because it's a free for all. And that's also why the black market's grown so much, is because it's not been one product that's been able to get shipped and handled this way. It's all of them.
Mm-hmm. So maybe just one last follow-up, and I'll transition back to Jesse, is, from this creation of the Farm Bill and everything that's happened subsequent, you've seen, and I hate to say both sides, but it kind of is, unfortunately, is like legal cannabis and intoxicating hemp, and all of the other things. Unfortunately, it feels like it's divided our industry, and it's divided our efforts, where one side is pulling more for the other side, saying, this and that. Why do you think there is such a divide between us when we're just trying to accomplish the same goal of federal legalization, recognition, enforcement, but at the same time, it feels like different lobbyist groups fighting for different things, and it's just diluting all of our efforts and creating this rift, which is really unfortunate because dollars are precious. But where do you think that stems from? And do you see a way that how does this proceed?
Yeah, I love talking about this, because I think this is actually the root cause of what's going on. I'll say the quick answer is to what's a large cause of the divide is, at this point with the climate of the industry, you have the big players, Curaleaf, Cresco, GTI, all of them. They're trying to focus on driving growth and driving revenue. And so because of that, they're having to pivot, right? And when we talk about Florida here in a few minutes, it's like they're having to focus on keeping their business alive versus focusing on what did we originally embark on, which was to legalize cannabis. So that is a trickle-down effect, automatically divides the industry, because those companies have brands that are legal cannabis and ones that are intoxicating hemp. And so that's a trickle down effect. But I think the true root cause of it, and this goes back to the beginning of this divide, several years ago, is that I'll use the example of California. It's like, that's where I spent most of my time, worked in a number of different states, but getting to see everything in California was just, it was the best thing I could have asked for. But you have this industry that was siloed away in the shadows for so many years. And being at the Emerald Cup and getting to work with Tim Blake, the founder of the Cup, seeing these people's way of life, living up in the Emerald Triangle in Humboldt County, Mendocino, and Trinity County, they were the ones driving this forward on the underground with incredible sun-grown cannabis. And that started in the 70s, and then that started growing and led to legalization in California in 96. Well, those people are also the same people that when it went rec, and I believe 2010, they're the ones that were putting their money up, their life savings, to be able to drive actual lawmaking within California, but also keep their livelihood without having to live in the shadows anymore, just like we can all understand. And they wanted to cross that barrier from illicit to white markets, and they were able to do that. They passed legislation, but the outcome of that was taxation to an extreme degree, just mishandling of the whole supply chain. Margins were small. Everybody was getting pinned down. And so you have these people that really helped create the industry, and now they're seeing people abuse this loophole that is not the industry. And so from a root cause culture standpoint, that's a lot of what has caused this rift. And I know some of the listeners might be thinking, well, how does that happen at such a small scale? And my response to that would be 60 to 70% of the country's weed at one point was coming from this one portion of the country in the Emerald Triangle. And so regardless of how many people live there, the supply was coming from there. And that's what started all this. And so bringing that into 2025 is that California is the only state where you're not selling THCA there. And that's because the people in California understand that this is not a new plant that exists. And also people that are in the other states, they want to sell cannabis. They want to have a business. They want to be a part of this industry because it's exciting. But doing it in a way that creates a loophole and not, I would say, what people would consider, the true essence of the plant or the true nature of how the industry started, that automatically creates a rift amongst people in different friend groups, amongst people of different mindsets, and amongst people that have different views on their personal experiences with cannabis or hemp. And so I think it's a ground level organic type of rift that's happening that's now expanded up to the big five companies, and then it's coming back down to the stores, and it's just a perpetual cycle.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, it seems a little, it's interesting from the perspective of, it's not the big five, it's every cannabis company
Totally.
that is seeing this, growth of competition and further pricing degradation, that's weakening the entire system, to your point, with insane taxes, not only at the state level, but the federal level with 280E. And you have this hemp industry that's running along with a lot of profit, that's funding a lot of, efforts to, it seems like the effort is they would like nothing more than the legal industry to go away and intoxicating hemp to have it all for themselves. And I just don't understand, again, why it's a winner. It has to be a zero-sum game. It's, why wouldn't they be advocating on our behalf too? Because the pie is huge, and let the consumer decide. But it's interesting how this continues to unfold. Sorry, just one last, and I'll pass it to Jesse. But, we're hearing noise today, or, more recently, Senator Rand Paul coming out and in defense of the hemp and saying we got to protect our farmers. I don't hear senators coming out and saying we need to protect the cannabis farmers, but, we got to protect these hemp farmers. So it just seems, very inconsistent, hypocritical, really, if you're selling a plant that, at the end of the day can cause the same benefits for people, but one is viewed as one of the worst substances on the planet, and one is one that we have to protect for the farmers in their states. But, do you see any potential changes coming from Congress around the Farm Bill or intoxicating hemp, or is this just more noise in Congress? And just as we have never seen any progress with banking reform or, other federal progress in cannabis, is this just noise and it'll just be status quo for the hemp side of things?
Yeah, first thing I want to briefly touch on is you mentioned the Rand Paul thing, and I completely agree with you that it's just wild how they're promoting, the hemp farmers, but not the cannabis farmers. And for me, that's actually the absolute antithesis of what is happening right now in the industry. You have legal cannabis that was fought for, approved, legislation passed, being sold at stores. Taxation was messing it up, but people could go buy legal cannabis for med and rec purposes. And now all of a sudden, those people that were doing that are in essence getting penalized because they're now getting pushed against by hemp. So I could not agree more with what you're saying about that just seeming, very conflicting. And so as far as, any changes I see happening to the Farm Bill, I really don't see any changes happening. I think that Congress and just government as a whole is extremely slow in general, but especially when it comes to cannabis and hemp. I believe that the 2018 Farm Bill is so bare bones or when it was passed in 2018, that it would take an enormous amount of not only time, but just collaboration and effort and science, being introduced to these people and years of knowledge that all of us have gained to even allow them to start discussing how can we, create a better construct. And so because of that simple reason, I don't really see them making any changes to that one. Potentially maybe an amendment at some point. But like, I'd mentioned to both of you before we'd hopped on is that if you're going to start doing that, you might as well start looking at the federal legalization, because you're going to take 5 years to figure out the new Farm Bill. And then you're going to take another 5 to 10 to do cannabis. It's like, why not knock all birds out with one stone? So in a nutshell, I don't really see any changes being made. I just see that any changes that could be made are going to be due directly to the pressure increasing from the illicit market, the gray market, and the white market, and the hemp versus cannabis conflict.
Yeah, and Tucker, you're mentioning California. We don't see a lot of let me reframe this. Intoxicating hemp products are available here. Like I see them at smoke shops in town, but I don't really see anyone in my circle consuming them. The black market is huge in California. We have about 1,300 dispensaries here. So there's access to a fair amount of proper cannabis. And so I sense that in states like California, where real weed is everywhere, people don't generally lean into the things in smoke shops and the intoxicating hemp market as much. On the other side of that equation are places like Texas, where you have a really restrictive but getting slightly better medical program. Texas has historically been a huge, black market state, partially for that reason. I'm sure you're well aware, Tucker, that, a lot of cannabis, from California at one point was ending up in Texas. And so Texas really seems like it's kind of, in some ways, become, one of, if not the epicenter for what's going on with intoxicating hemp, because unless you have one of these fairly strict qualifying conditions, you can't access the medical program. And even if you were in the medical program, the access is, so limited in Texas. So people have really leaned into that smoke shop circuit, or the hemp stores, or even they call them hemp dispensaries. There's a bunch of names for the different, for essentially the same thing out there. Do you want to give us a bit of an overview of that Texas market, what's going on there? And then maybe we can talk a little bit about where things might be headed.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. What I'm seeing in Texas from being hands-on and just from, knowing people in the industry that are there and doing business directly there is it's another situation where it's pretty straightforward, but it's also complicated at the same time. For purposes of this overview, I'm going to kind of separate the med program out simply because that's, so small and, not really in operation right now. But to me, Texas is the perfect example of exemplifying everything we've talked about between the multiple markets, the white, black, and gray market. You have a state that has a large population and a lot of people that like to smoke weed. And since weed was being sold in these states from, decades ago, that was happening a lot. The governments, they know it's happening. They might assess a dollar value to the illicit market there, but that number of value they're attaching is always so low compared to what reality is, because people are doing this in the shadows. So now that you see this transition of the laws, the loopholes being utilized in, like I said before, a really intelligent way by these people, they have now created a whole new market. You now have large strip centers that now have 2, 3, 4 smoke shops in them over, a 2 zip code area. You now have other industries, real estate, mortgages on buildings that all get looped into this space now. And from a, if you just look at it head on, it seems like, well, how is that possible that that's all looped in? But if you think about any industry, that requires buildings, infrastructure, banking, all of these things. So now you have a large group of people that are selling product in their mind and in the state's lack of knowledge that is legal. And so what does that do? Like I said earlier, it opens the door for the gray market to be bigger, which is the same as the black market. And now it's forward facing. And so consumers can get what they want when they want without any concern or fear, realistically, of anything negative happening or any type of just getting in trouble. Basically, there's no fear of that. And so as we see this continue to grow, we saw instantly that Texas, everybody was up in arms. They had all these different THC stuff. People didn't understand because it's confusing. They obviously went to a vote. A lot of people thought it was going to pass with a full ban. And I was sitting back consulting with these hemp companies, telling them this isn't going to happen. The big companies that have a say and have push and have money, they don't want this to happen because they're involved and they're going to file injunctions. And to my knowledge, there was 40 plus injunctions filed. And then we saw a few days later, the governor of Texas veto it. And for me, that is a prime example of you're vetoing that for two reasons. One, you did some research and realized our economy is very reliant on this in certain communities and in certain areas of this state. This is going to cause economic hardship in multiple industries. And this is also going to cause people to go back into poverty, depending on if this was their only income source. Mm-hmm. So that's one. So that's obviously not good. Let's veto it for that. But then also it's that same idea of, if we're going to spend a year trying to hash out all these different modalities of the product, let's just try to make it legal and have a rec and med program. I don't know if that's what their game plan is now, but my opinion, and at least what would be intelligent for them to do, is to be hashing that out now so that on the go forward, they can make revenue on all this illicit money, and they can make revenue just based on how they want to set up their tax system.
Yeah, I was just putting in Chat GPT what the taxes are in Texas, and it sounds like, Tucker, they're just subject to that state sales tax of what, 6.25%?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in Tennessee, there's no state income tax. So, or wait, is it state sales tax or income tax? I'm a finance guy. I probably shouldn't be asking that.
Sales tax always exists. It's whether or not income tax exists or not, right?
Okay, cool. All right, I said it right the first time. I just didn't want to. I didn't want to be misspeaking, but. Yeah. So you talk about an industry right now in cannabis in legal states that have additional taxes, excise tax, and everything on top of it, just the regular taxation. So even in a state where they have legal cannabis, you might as well just eliminate that and sell intoxicating hemp. You avoid all those tax issues, and there's a number of other financial things that you can avoid. Yeah.
And so if I walked into a smoke shop in Texas now, can I get I guess things might have changed in early September, but broadly speaking, before that, could I get the full complement of products?
Yes, to my knowledge. I mean, I've got friends that live in Texas. I mean, I've obviously been there myself. Used to live in Houston way back in the day. And I mean, you literally can just get, and it sounds kind of crazy if you're in a state that's only legal, that only has legal cannabis and not many smoke shops like this, but you literally can just walk in and they've got THCA, THCP, THCV, and who knows if what they have is actually what they say it is.
Right. Yeah.
The primary problem, but then secondarily, you can just buy whatever you want. So it's that straightforward.
And is it right that there's a vape ban as of September 1st?
That's a great question. The vape is something that I always get confused on from the nicotine side and the cannabis side. So I'm not 100% sure if there is a ban, but I would not be surprised just because all these states are trying to crack down on that.
Does that jive with your notes, Morgan?
Talking about with
THC,
executive order,
THC vapes being banned in Texas. Banned.
I know they maintained beverage and was it gummies?
Okay, here's what I'm seeing. It says that sorry, Morgan. I didn't mean to.
Yeah. As of September 1st, Texas implemented SB 2024 that banned the sale and marketing of vapes containing THC and other hemp-derived cannabinoids.
Here's what's interesting, though. What I'm seeing right here in this recap from the Texas Tribune is that the law does not ban the possession of them.
Right.
It only bans, it only penalizes people selling them. So what kind of law is that? You know what I mean? It's like if I'm holding one, smoking it, using it, I'm not in trouble. If they find out who sold it to me, they're in trouble. So that's just going to push things back into the black market.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I know with some restrictions, but Abbott's executive order, to me, basically, and I think Tucker, you said this, was intoxicating hemp is now the adult use market in Texas, and there will be a fledgling medical market. But it's there's no competitive basis with the medical market. There's no incentive for anyone to go through the process of getting a medical card and paying the higher prices when in their minds, whether or not it's true, they can just buy substantially the same thing via their gas station down the street.
Absolutely.
So, and I just, the big question, I do believe Texas is more of an enforcement forward kind of state, but it's going to be whack-a-mole for them. Like it's going to be a huge budget to go and actually make sure that these stores are selling what is under the executive order. And the other thing about an executive order is there's no permanence. I mean, I'm assuming Abbott will probably be a governor for a very, very long time, unless he has other aspirations. But as long as he's there, that does exist. And, unless they do turn it into law, right? I mean, that could go away theoretically under another governor that doesn't want that executive order. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's definitely fair. And I think that's even more than fair. I think that's spot on. And, obviously was excited to come on this podcast for a number of reasons, but one of the biggest ones is just spreading the knowledge, right? It's like I can learn stuff every day, but a lot of these companies I've worked for, consulted for, even some of the state governments I've consulted for, their first question is, what's the biggest problem in the industry right now? Is it taxes? And I always laugh and I'm like, taxes are a problem in every industry. The real issue is the lack of knowledge and the large learning curve for consumers, right? This is a product that's being cultivated, manufactured, and distributed for the consumers. And I feel like the industry's lost sight of that, getting caught up in the laws and all those things, which are important. But if the end goal is to spread the medicinal aspects and just the beauty of the cannabis plant to the consumers need to be educated. And so a lot of these things I don't even put on the consumers because it's up to lawmakers. It's up to people like us talking in a forum like this, because we have some of that knowledge to really inform the consumer. And, just my opinion is if I was living in a state like Texas and there was recreational or medical, we'll just say medical for this example, cannabis that I knew was real cannabis, and it was tested by the state and all of those things, I'm going to spend more money, whatever the tax is, and if it's just more, retail price, to buy what I actually want to try, which is real cannabis. And for me, I think that's also just a big piece of this is that, like you said, there's no incentive for somebody that thinks they're buying the same thing to go that route, if that even existed. But even if it did in today's climate, people don't have enough knowledge to either care or to even know the difference. So they're going to go with the cheaper and easier route every single time. And I think that's another item that really needs to be addressed in the industry nationwide.
Yeah, I mean, the three of us spend all day, every day thinking about this stuff, and we're still kind of, wandering our way through this conversation, trying to connect all the dots. Now you just take the average, Joe or Mary on the street trying to understand this stuff. I think you're right. It's a massive education project. In the spirit of time, why don't we transition over to Florida, which I think is a really interesting example because it's different, similar and different than Texas. I mean, there's not an adult use program, but it does have a thriving rec program, and then it also is trying to get to adult use. We'll see if that can happen next year. And Morgan, curious to get your take on this, but now they have the 130 million, I think it is, tourists that come to Florida. They can't access the medical program, but they sure can go to the black market or these hemp stores. So I think Florida's an interesting thing to compare and contrast with Texas. So with that preamble, why don't I hand it over to you, Morgan?
Yeah, I mean, Florida, thank you for some of these cheat sheet notes, but Florida has 728 medical cannabis dispensaries and over 5,000 smoke shops. So to your point, a much more robust medical market. It's a pretty good structure, I think, from, the verticality of it. But here we are once again, a state that has set a very high bar to pass adult use, because it's, this big awful thing, but yet these smoke shops are able to freely sell these products untested or whatever, because there's no regulation in Florida around hemp, that are located next to ice cream stores and candy shops and things where kids are, and and there's no concern there, which is again, just feeling like it's just a battle between maybe some of the operators and the state, but again, just the inconsistent positioning around it of how do you defend one and support the other. But nonetheless, I mean, it's become a big enough thing to, I think, as you noted, like Curaleaf has started to open hemp stores where they're selling hemp beverages and, dabbling in that to see what it's like, because they're, who knows when, no one knows when laws are gonna, or the next time we'll get a voter initiative. If in Florida there's even talk about raising the already very high barrier to pass adult use. So the shifting goal line there is tricky to see path for that. I mean, I would obviously love it for the benefit of Florida. To your point, Jesse, the huge tourism dollars, like it's a very big market, and but it's how do we get there? We don't know. So you're seeing people out trying to figure out how they stay in this game while this is going on. But Tucker, from your perspective, how do you compare what's going on in Florida versus Texas from the hemp side of things? Is it substantially the same? Is it different? Like what's kind of going on?
I think it's different in some aspects and the same in others. I think it's the same in the sense that, once again, intoxicating hemp is branching out from just the original cannabis market. That's happening, like we just talked about, in Texas, and that's really happening in Florida. So I think they're similar in that regard, but I think they're different in the timeline that each state is on. Texas is behind Florida as far as the scope of the med program and those things. But I think they're also behind when it comes to the large scale forward facing hemp stores that we're now seeing in Florida. Texas, in my mind, still has a lot to figure out. All we know right now is that things are operating as they were previously, and we're just kind of waiting on legislation. Whereas in Florida, the Curaleaf thing, it's just crazy to me to think that Curaleaf and these brands spent so much money, cultivation licenses, excise tax, cultivation tax, real estate, all of that, to build these cannabis stores. And now, several years later, what are they doing? They're literally doing the same thing, but just with intoxicating hemp. And to me, I think that Florida is, for lack of a better term, one of the quote unquote weirdest states, because you would think by now they would have passed, a full rec program. Some of my friends that live in Florida, they have med cards. I have friends in other states that have a Florida med card, which technically, shouldn't be allowed. So I think there's a lot of gray area there. And just going once again back to your specific question, is I think it's unparalleled what we're seeing in Florida. So even though there's similarities to Texas, we've not yet seen a state where a big company such as Curaleaf has said, you know what, we're rolling out a whole new chain of stores, versus it just being little mom and pop smoke shops.
From the hemp side, do you know of any of the groups that were supporting DeSantis and trying to stymie the adult use pass? It was very close. I mean, if you actually go back and relook at the numbers, like it was crazy close. But it was just enough, obviously, to not pass. But it seemed like they were well funded and supporting, blocking that initiative.
That's a great question. I actually looked into this several years ago. I was just looking at some of my notes here. Let me pull this thing up here. Looking at this article that I had saved from 2023. Here it is. 2 firms.
In the meantime, our guy Guap here is reporting he's ordering 200 milligram live resin edibles through a website. He's drinking THC beverages from a local brewery. Says all the strip balls. I think he's in North Carolina, if I recall correctly. Yeah. And he's saying that the dispensaries look, the hemp shops look just like stores in, Colorado. So yeah, it sounds like the Carolinas are thriving with the hemp.
Well, and El Guapo, that's actually where I was based. When I was with BAT, I was in North Carolina. And then when I was consulting for some of these large hemp companies, I was in North Carolina, and they have some of the most lax laws on hemp production. But once again, it's kind of like anytime somebody mentions laws around hemp, it's kind of just like there's already no laws. The states aren't enforcing anything. So, it is what it is. But yeah, everything looks like a legit dispensary now, and it's kind of crazy. So, all right, I'm looking here. To answer your question, Morgan, this article is talking about the Never Back Down initiative because of DeSantis' personal opinion that, pot's a menace to society. That's actually what the headline says. I haven't said the word pot in a number of years, but it says that there was two groups backing them, Axiom Strategies and Vanguard Field Strategies, that were basically, I guess, just putting a ton of money into the lobbying efforts. Well, actually, this article is confusing. I think they might have actually been supporting legal marijuana, but at the end of the day, I don't know a specific group that was backing that. But my opinion is that I think it's a lot of personal stuff for DeSantis. I also think that there's groups that have a vested interest in keeping Florida medical, because if it goes full rec, all these other brands can capture the market. And if you think about it, Florida's got a large population, large tourism, as you mentioned. And if the only way for those certain companies to maintain their stronghold is to keep the competition out, that's what they're going to do, right? If you have to get a med card in the state, people are making money on med cards. They're making money on cultivation because there's large cultivations happening. So the state's still making their money. Would they make more going rec? Of course. But if they're already making what they feel like is what they want to make, there's not really a vested interest in growing it more from a crime standpoint. And from just the flip side of whoever these groups are that are backing them are obviously powerful. And I think that's why everybody thought that was going to pass, and it was very close, but it didn't. So that's a great question. I really would love to know who was backing that and what was their premise behind doing so.
Yeah. When you express a concern about if they went adult use and all these other brands could come in, I'm curious what you mean by that. I mean, it's still federally legal, so it still has to be contained within the state. The state has a licensing structure that would presumably carry into an adult use. So where is your concern that they think of outside competition coming in?
So when I was at Lil Wayne's company, Jakua, while I was there, I took the brand to 5 states, Nevada, Michigan, Colorado, several others, and we were going into Florida. And this is when Florida was like up and coming. The med program had started. Everybody was really excited. And I believe that the group that we were talking to at the time was Surterra Wellness. Does that sound right to you, Jesse? That's in Florida. It was one of the groups that was really heavy in Florida. It might not be Surterra, but it's a group that at the time was one of the big ones. I believe since then has been acquired or is kind of operating on an offshoot. But the reason I'm mentioning that is that in that process, Surterra Wellness owned every single, I'm not going to call it Surterra just in case that's incorrect. I'll just call it XYZ. XYZ owned all of the licensing rights for cannabis cultivation, for dispensaries, for all of those things. They had a lottery system, but those are all just, if you pay enough money, you'll probably get the lottery. That always ironically, seemingly works out. And so if you look at it through the lens of a company like that, if they're just a monopoly in the state of Florida, the second competition comes in, their money's going to drop. And so I don't know what that landscape is right now behind the scenes, but that's what I mean by holding out the competition. Because if competition comes in, there's a chance they could make a little more money, but they for sure can lose money if they don't execute better and keep up with the competition. But if they keep it the way it is, if a company, which I believe is still the case, probably there's 1 or 2 companies controlling all of this, they're going to continue controlling it and making a lot of money. And the only thing that can happen from big brands coming in is them losing money.
Do you have experience, Morgan?
The way I kind of laid that out?
Well, like why wouldn't Curaleaf and Trulieve want adult use? Because that's just going to give them a ton more customers, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I just know so much information on this. This is one of those times I'm trying to synthesize it all. I don't necessarily think that they don't want adult use. Just specifically related to Morgan's question as to what do you think could have been backing, that push or lobbying group to ban cannabis. I just am saying that I think there is a potential chance that one of the big players that holds a lot of the assets in the state might not have felt that they were ready to do that yet. Because when competition comes in, once again, if you hold all the rights to the licenses, if you hold all the cultivation rights to the cultivation facilities granted by the state, that's going to change the second big competition comes in. So by no means do I think they're saying, oh, we don't want adult use. I'm just saying in specific regards to Morgan's question, I think that could be a possibility that behind the scenes, whoever is kind of owning the majority of that, they either weren't ready or they wanted to acquire more assets before doing so they could then, who knows, lease out those cultivation sites to the new competition and continue maintaining their business. So that's just speculation. That's just based on sheer experience. And that is just purely nothing more than speculation as to who could have been behind it. But that's one reason that I would suspect if there was a group behind it, that could be a reason why.
Do you see anything changing in Florida as far as hemp goes? Or is there any discussion around formulating a regulatory program, status quo again, just Wild West?
To me, that's always the $1 million question. I feel like, as we kind of talked about with the government earlier, like I feel like a lot of things are just, it's a lot of smoke, no pun intended. I could talk to 10 different contacts and I'll get 5 to 8 different opinions on what's going on in any certain state. So I think that it's an important thing that people need to take note of, that especially a group like Curaleaf is now creating a whole new chain of retail dispensaries focused around intoxicating hemp. I think that's really a big deal. And I think we could see effects of that down the road in other states. But I really can't speak too much to anything that I'm hearing, particularly surrounding changes in that market or any type of restructuring of the legislation to pass either tighter laws on hemp or to pass, an adult use market.
So, it's kind of interesting as we've watched a lot of this, we've been in the business now since 2014 officially. We saw the CBD boom come and, those companies were, big, fat, happy, huge margins, thought they owned the world. Prices collapsed. Almost all of them went out of business. We were wondering if similar would happen in the hemp, in intoxicating hemp, because again, like other commodities, high prices bring supply. And, wondering if there would be a point where pricing, which had been attractive in the intoxicating hemp, that whole cohort, would eventually see some, as expected, just like everything else does, sees a price compression. We're starting to hear rumblings about that. Some companies starting to shut down. Volumes are not growing as strongly as they were expecting. And now with price compression, without the scale, companies are folding up shop in the hemp side of things. Are you seeing anything like that yet? And, what do you think that means for the future if they do start feeling some competitive pressures that are really impacting margins for the hemp side?
Yeah. So if you look at the cannabis space, these brands that have survived, there's obviously a million reasons that have been behind them surviving. But one of the biggest things is that they have the ability to stake market share, because even though there are a lot of competitors, as both of you know, especially in a state like California, it's like if you had the brand, if you had the lifestyle behind it, people would buy your product. And so in a relative sense, there's a lot of competitors, but there's not 5 million. You now look in the hemp space, everybody's a competitor. I could be a drink brand making, seltzers like, White Claw or High Noon, and just randomly decide, you know what, I'm going to run a batch with CBD in it. I'm going to run a batch with D9 hemp. There's no legislation on that. Totally fine to do. In Nashville, there's bars now that you can buy. Their whole marketing thing is, you're drinking weed drinks.
Yeah, I mean, Guap noted that actually in his comment too, and we're seeing that also microbreweries, they're all offering it. I mean, they're all jumping in on it because they want to have that offering available, and if no one's telling them no, they're seeing their beer volumes decline, so why would they not? So it's
100%. It's like it makes sense why they're doing it, but those are the reasons why I think these rumblings are happening of these businesses shutting down. If you have just such an immense amount of competition from people that might not even really want to be in the space, but realize we could spend a little more money, throw it in our beer, whatever it may be. So now you not only have way more competition, you have competition that's not even related to your product. If you're making a gummy, somebody might say, well, I just want to go drink this beer. Those really shouldn't be competing spaces, but they now have become that. And so I think that the price compression that is happening because companies need to reduce their cost to try to sell at the point of sale, whether that's D2C or at a store, that combined with the fact that a lot of these big established legal cannabis brands, they're now creating their own brands in the hemp space. Right. So Kiva, I saw even Papa and Barclays that I love their product and used to work with closely when I was in Northern California. It's like, I would have never thought that they were getting into this space. And when you have somebody like that comes in that already has namesake and has infrastructure, operations, and knowledge, a mom and pop brand or somebody that wanted to get into this space just because they were excited about it, for lack of a better term, they don't really stand a chance. They can get a market share maybe in their town or one smoke shop, but to actually run a viable business at a large scale, it's really hard. And I think those factors is what is leading to the rumblings, but is also leading to brands that I know that have shut down that did well for a year or two, but they just couldn't keep sustaining.
Yeah, I've been going to a few concerts this summer. We have a place called Santa Barbara Bowl here, which seats a couple thousand people and overlooks the city and gets a bunch of good kind of mid-size acts. And man, I would kill for a THC beverage at one of those things. I don't, a lot of times don't want to drink. You can eat a face full of edibles before you get in there, but then you're just sitting there drinking water the whole time.
Yeah,
Smoking.
You never know how it's going to hit you too. It might come all at once.
Yeah, you got to time that, and then they don't like smoking at those places, and sometimes there's families around, and I don't feel good lighting up next to like a 12-year-old, a 12-year-old or something like that. People are hitting vapes a little bit, but I just see people crushing beers. Not against crushing a couple beers, but for a lot of these shows, crushing a couple weed drinks would go better. So, yeah, it'd be cool if we could figure this out and get regulated access, so we can get all these different form factors in a safe manner, across the U.S. And so maybe I'll use that as a bit of a segue, Tucker. Where do you think we go from here? Like, we have this patchwork of regulations where we have the 24 adult use states, and man, that's like operating in 24 different countries. And I knew this when I was an analyst, and I knew this when I ran a cannabis business in California. But with Leaf, we're in California and we're in New York now. Two completely different sets of regulations, different licenses, different supply chains, different consumer preferences. I mean, it really might as well be, running a multinational corporation when you start running a cannabis company in different states. Now, again, looking at me and what we're doing at Leaf, we have this Salisbury Canyon Ranch asset, which is this 1,900-acre ranch we have. We have a 187-acre cannabis permit. We put in the first 65 acres. Further back over here in the property, we've got this 100-acre hemp permit that's currently dormant, and we'd love to use it, but with the lack of clarity around regulations in California, lack of clarity around regulations in other states. So let's say we could produce and ship things from California. What is the market for that? And then overlay that with the federal picture, which is unclear on the cannabis side, unclear on the hemp side. I mean, man, we just have hours and hours of conversations about, how do you, if you're a Glass House, if you're a Leaf, if you're any cannabis company, Morgan, every, MSO we've had on in the last year, we've had a conversation about, hemp with them, trying to figure out how to strategize, where do we all go from here? And so I guess my question to you is, how do you see this national landscape evolving, and what advice would you have for, on the cannabis and the hemp side to make the most of the opportunity? Because you want to be opportunistic, but you also don't want to step into something at the wrong time when prices are going to collapse and regulations are going to change.
Yeah, it's like, as the listeners have probably been able to tell, I talk super fast. And this is the type of question that really gets me going, because it really touches all aspects of what's going on. I think the analogy of 24 different countries is spot on. And when you think about that, that really is just crazy. I mean, that just makes absolutely no logical or rational sense. And so there's a number of different things that I can see coming from this, or where this could head. But just trying to view it in a simple form, like in a nutshell, there's a lot going on, and we got a long ways to go to get this figured out. And I'm always somebody that's glass half full. So I do believe that people's commitment to the plant, people like us that are having these conversations, that we can drive this forward. And so I'm not going to sit here and say, hey, things aren't going to happen and all that stuff, because I'll never say that. But in the state we are in now, there's a lot of things outside of the cannabis industry that are happening politically that, in most people's mind, take precedence over this. So I think those things push this down the list, which doesn't help us and doesn't help the overall situation. And so my opinion is that where this will go is we're going to continue to see the illicit market grow. I call it the traditional market. That's just how we always call it, but that's kind of confusing. But we will continue to see the traditional / black market grow, and it will grow in ways that don't seem illicit. It's like hiding in plain sight. It's the best way to do it. It will grow in ways that people in their towns, communities, smoke shops, they will not know, hey, this is illicit, right? That will not be the vibe. It will not be a guy on the street, giving you some weed in a brown bag. It will be very forward facing. But as that continues to increase, that is going to directly cause further pressure on state legislators. They're going to see more loss of tax revenue from this as they continually see people making large amounts of money not paying taxes on it. And so I think that from the economic side of that, and then I think from pressure within the state, consumers, I think, need to take it upon themselves to talk to their lobbyist. I'm not going to sit here and say you have one conversation or one email that's going to change it overnight, but these tiny things all add up. And I think each state is dealing with their own set of problems and their own landscape. And so I think it's going to take more time. I can't put a time frame on it, but it's not going to be 6 months. It's going to be longer than that. Could be a couple years to ultimately push all of this to a boiling point where the federal government has to do something. And once again, we've seen in the past that doesn't happen. And if it doesn't happen, this is going to continue to grow as a problem. And ultimately, it's going to become one whole illicit market because people are going to be shipping across state lines. People are going to be doing deals in multiple states. It's like no brand wants to make a brand in one state and stay there. So business growth naturally happening will happen. And unless legislation is passed before that, it's the Pandora's box that Morgan said. You can't put it back in, and it's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger. Because right now, the one thing that is for certain is that the more people that have experience with some form of cannabis, whether it be intoxicating hemp or real cannabis, people like it. People like it. This is not decreasing in usage. It is only exponentially increasing. When we saw COVID hit, the only industry that survived was cannabis went up. I mean, I'm sure there were some others, but like cannabis sales increased. People were at home. They were dealing with stuff. They wanted to smoke. They wanted to consume. They wanted to dab, whatever it may be. So where this is headed, I believe we're going to continue down the path we're on now with a lot of confusion, a lot of conversations around different things, but not a lot of action. But I think there will be a distinct point in time where all of these things come to a head. And that is going to force either several states in a certain region to come together and push federal legislation or create their own type of legislation, to make their areas safer and better economically. And then second part of the question, you were asking about what would I say to somebody? I would say do a lot of research. There's a lot of research out there, but really focus on what is your business and what research applies to your business. There's no point if you're focusing on doing a smoke shop that you need to be reading about all these things in these other states. That's awesome. That's very knowledge gaining. But if you're focused on your business, be hyper focused on that and don't listen to a lot of the noise because it's simply that, it's noise. And then second, I would say focus on making the best product. I've always said that from being in the industry from the beginning, and I will never deviate from that. Even from the finance side, I was the guy that said, let's spend an extra 2 cents or 3 cents or whatever it may be to make the better product. Better product will always win. Healthy always win. And that was exciting. That little sound there. I thought people in the crowd were cheering for me.
Soundbite. The round of applause there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And so, yeah, I think that's the other thing. Focus on your product, focus on your consumer. And then lastly, I said hyper-focus a minute ago, but stay in your lane. Not because you can't go out to other lanes, but if you really want to survive in this market, the way to do it is absolutely to not try to do 50 things at once. If you start doing that, you get caught up in a whole web of stuff that you don't know a lot about. And that is a recipe for non-success. Because it's already hard enough if you're staying straight and narrow to make that work. Don't complicate it and don't branch out into a number of areas that you might not have a ton of knowledge on or that you think are hot items, because all this stuff is short term. Some of these things are flash in the pan. You want to capitalize, but focus on what your core business is and focus on what it is you really want to do and make sure the product's always as good as it possibly can be.
And last question, and just give me oh, sorry. Good, Morgan.
Oh, yeah, no, it's to your point about focus, the hemp industry and especially some of the trade groups, I feel like, to your point, they've gotten hyper focused on this aspect much more so than, the much, much bigger aspect of hemp being on the industrial side. one of the companies that's near and dear to my heart, Basscore in Alabama, purely for the, it's IP technology company for processing of industrial grade hemp stalks, natural fibers. They could also potentially do flax too, but, for textiles, for the nonwovens, some of their byproducts go into the animal bedding space. These are huge, huge markets, like talking with all these international textile mills that are wanting US grown processed hemp. And I just, I do have I don't know if I have much concern, but it is a little bit, I think, is like short-termism is probably the better way to say it, is that these trade groups are super focused on this intoxicating aspect and potentially neglecting a far, far bigger, much longer lasting potential segment of hemp. Because hemp, when you just call it this collective thing, is trying to do this huge catch-all, but they're only focused on this tiny little slice of it. So that's one thing that, from what you were talking about that resonated with me. The second thing is basically what I'm hearing is your advice from all of this is legal cannabis should just get into intoxicating hemp because it's adult use and they can ship it all over the country and ship their brands everywhere. And don't, there's not much concern from any regulatory or legal pushback for the next, who knows, years.
I mean, I would say that, like you had just mentioned me saying, I think these brands should get into that. I think maybe that's true in some aspects. I think a better way to maybe phrase it just from how I think about it is like, I want cannabis to be federally legal. I want this to work. We all want this to work. I want the plant to be accessible to people. I want it to be the right type of product. I want people to have the experiences that we've had with the plant and be able to share that. And so for me, the legal cannabis side is so critical. But because I've been in that industry, I know how hard it is to survive. I've been with companies that have been successful. I've been with companies that have gone down. And anybody that's in the space that tells you otherwise, I wouldn't listen to those people because they haven't really been involved if they think that everywhere they've been has just worked. There's so many issues, so many people fighting every day, people working paycheck to paycheck, and really grinding it out. And so in that regard, from my business hat, having my business hat on and having a financial hat on, it's worth looking into for those brands. And if you have a large enough brand in California or Colorado or somewhere, or New York, anywhere that I think is considered maybe more established, like Nevada or somewhere like that too, if you have enough of a brand in legal cannabis, you should be able to make the transition to hemp without too much of a heavy lift. It will cost, there will be money involved, some revamp of product SKUs. But if you're trying to survive and you need the additional revenue, I think it's totally worth branching into, because if you already have the facilities to grow cannabis or you can outsource your hemp, all you got to do is buy packaging, right? So I think people would be doing a disservice to themselves to not try to stay afloat. But for me, it's like you said, this very narrow focus on intoxicating hemp, I think, is deterring from the overall focus of hemp. I think it's largely deterring from the focus of legal cannabis. And I think in 6 months to a year, we could see this shift again, just like CBD. But if somebody has a personal business, it's like, I think they should take it upon themselves to stay focused on their one aspect, because if it works for only a year, well, it worked, and then maybe pivot at that point. But I could not agree more with things you said surrounding this huge divide. And for me, it's like that's really hurting. And I really think that we need to try to bring those back together and push both as one versus pushing two, because each time one gets pushed above, the other one's getting inadvertently knocked down.
And last question for me, Tucker, then I'll let you wrap us with the Grok Morgan. And you just have to answer which one you want. You and I have $10 million. We're starting the Jesse and Tucker cannabis program. We're considering adding Morgan. We're going to see how it goes. Just kidding. You're in, Morgan. Are we starting an intoxicating hemp business, or are we starting a cannabis business?
We're starting a cannabis business.
Why?
I think cannabis is the crux of all this. I think the long-term focus, which I got to see a lot at BAT, is cannabis. I think intoxicating hemp will dissolve to a certain degree once that's happened, but I think we're a long way away from that. I really do. I'm not saying 20 years, but I don't think it's 2 or 3 years. I think it's longer than that. But I still believe that if with the $10 million, which is it's a good amount of money to set up a good operation, that if we were to market strategically, create the right product SKUs, high quality, extremely efficacious products, that those brands can survive in different states. And with that $10 million, I would want us to set up other operations for our brand in those states, very similar to Leaf. And I think, at a certain point, maybe branch off into the intoxicating hemp. But once again, if that changes in 6 months to a year, at least our business is focused on cannabis, and we can continue riding that wave.
Awesome. I like it. All right, Morgan, take us home with an Ask Rock. I got to get my kid from school in a bit.
Okay. This is a bit of a left field from today's discussion, but because we were having a conversation about this internally. So I said to Grok, Kelshi odds of cannabis rescheduling in 2026 have been declining since mid-August, while 2027 odds are still holding. What percentage odds do you think, Grok, are reasonable for rescheduling in 2026 versus 2027? Grok says, in my view, these market implied figures are a solid baseline, but slightly undervalue the momentum from Trump's signaling and the DEA's likely inclination, accounting for midterm elections in 2026, potentially accelerating reform to appease voters, ongoing state level expansions, as Jesse knows, 24 recreational, 40 medical, administration's 4-year window. So Grok applied for 2026, a 45% probability. This is above current markets, 41%, I believe, on Kelshi, and due to expected progress post any 2025 hearing, but tempered by GOP funding threats that could spill into the new year. Now, for 2027, the odds are, I think Kelshi's at like 71 right now. Grok says 30%. If this slips past 2026, conditional likelihood remains decent, but rising debt maturities in the industry and potential post-midterm gridlock could delay things further. So this puts a cumulative odds, though, still around 80-85%, higher than Kelshi's 26 figure, but realistic for Trump's term. So,
did you intentionally leave off 2025, Morgan?
Sorry. So to frame that, it's before 26 or before 27.
Okay. Okay. So can you repeat the numbers in that context? So before 2026 are what
40,
and what?
45%.
Okay.
So basically by end of this year.
And that's what Grok is saying, it's 45%?
Yes.
Got it.
Okay.
And before the end of 26, a 30% likelihood. So they actually, Grok thinks a higher shot this year, a lower percentage due to midterms and other, things getting in the way. By the end of next year.
That kind of goes back to what I was just saying. It's like, this is going to take time. You have all these external factors that are contributing to this. And this is why we're truly riding a never ending wave.
That's all I'll say is a deep sigh.
Yeah. I think
good chat.
Super interesting. So
yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, bigger discussion. I don't even want to start talking about Schedule 3.
AI overlords. Yeah, where's the ARG?
Yeah, no, I need to build up my sound effects a little bit more. Yeah, man, it's been exhausting. We had all the hype in August and all the tweets from the influencers, and even though I'm mostly dead inside, not quite completely like Morgan, I managed to get a little bit excited. And yeah, it's a bit of a bummer that it's toned down, but I'm not in panic mode. Trying to stay calm. Hopefully, we can get something done this fall, but we'll see.
Absolutely.
Well, good chat today, boys. Tucker, really appreciate you joining us. If people liked what they heard, they want to follow you, they want to get in touch with you, where would people find a man like yourself?
So my Twitter account, the X account that I just created is it's @_Tucker TUCKER_Johnson JOHNSON. And then my email is tucker.johnson517@gmail.com. So I'd love for people to reach out if they got questions, want an opportunity to connect. And obviously I'm always open to new working relationships. So please reach out to me. And Jesse and Morgan, I can't tell you thank you enough for having me on. It's been great to be on here. Love talking about these topics, and hope to come back soon and discuss some other items.
Well, sounds great. Morgan, always good to talk to you, my friend. I'll be rooting for your Bills tonight since the Vikings aren't playing. I don't have any vested interest, so good luck with your Bills tonight. Thank you guys all for listening. Don't forget to watch on YouTube. While you're over there, do us a favor and like and subscribe. We're slowly building up that base on YouTube, so we appreciate that. And we'll talk to you guys again soon.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Tucker. The views expressed on this podcast are provided for informational purposes only. Nothing we said should be considered research nor a recommendation. All investing involves risk, including the loss of principal.